Hi, everyone. As we're getting close to our start time, I see people are starting to join. So just as a reminder, if you could please mute your microphones. It should be set up to mute as you enter, and I can mute you too if I hear background noise, but if you notice that you unmute yourself for some reason, just please mute while we're doing the webinar to limit the background noise. And feel free to use the chat feature to introduce yourself to the group. If you are not seeing the chat feature, you should be able to hover over the either top or bottom of your screen, depending on how your screen pops up. There should be an option that says chat or a button that says more and has the chat feature within that. So hopefully you can all find the chat feature and just introduce yourself, where you're from, and feel free to share a little bit about what you do in the chat while we're waiting to get started. For folks to join us, we'll get started in just a few minutes. It looks like I see Ray has joined us. Welcome, Ray. Hopefully you can hear me okay. As we're waiting for people to log on, again, a reminder to please make sure you mute your microphone so that we limit the background noise, and please use the chat feature to introduce yourself to the group. If you're having trouble finding the chat feature, you hover on your screen either at the top or bottom. There should be a little toolbar that has a bunch of different things you can do, and if you don't see chat pop up, there should be a button that says more with 3 little dots, and under there is the chat button. So please introduce yourself, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Great. Thanks for introducing yourself, Anita. Okay, so it is 10:02 Central Standard Time, so I think for the sake of time, we are going to get started with our webinar today. And just a reminder to everyone that we are recording today's webinar, so just to be aware of that as you share questions and comments and information in the chat, that will all be recorded and shared with our larger group that we have a distribution for, and to those who are sleeping on other sides of the world right now and not able to join us. So we're really grateful for you to take the time to be with us this morning for our first webinar of the Break Exchange. My name is Kim Whitmore, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Nursing at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the USA. And I'm going to turn my computer slightly to let my lab manager introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Tyler Engel. I'm Kim's lab manager and manage the research lab.
Great, all right. So today's webinar, we are going to, there we go, get to the next slide here. We are going to talk a little bit about respite research and why it's important, describe what a knowledge exchange is, and give you some details on the Break Exchange that has been recently created, and talk a little bit about how to stay connected and get more involved in the Break Exchange. So as many of you on the line probably are aware, we know a lot, and there's a lot of research about caregivers. And we know that caregivers of people with disabilities face increased risk for a lot of negative health outcomes, including stress, fatigue, poor quality of life. They often experience greater marital stress, which can lead to divorce, especially in parents of children with special health care needs. There's often an increased financial stress and job loss that can come from increased medical and therapy services, as well as the need to cut back work to care for the individuals that they're caring for. And that individuals with disabilities, whether it's kids or adults, are at much greater risk of abuse and neglect. And so we know all of these things about caregivers, and all of us in the world of respite care know how important respite care is in helping to reduce the risk for these negative outcomes in our families that we work with. However, respite care research is somewhat limited. Though we do have some studies that help us understand how respite care may decrease stress and some of these negative health outcomes, there's not a huge body of that research, and there's some limitations to the research that does exist. We do know that respite care needs are largely unmet from a lot of the studies that are out there looking at parents' perceptions and some qualitative studies that describe how parents feel about respite care. There never seems to be enough respite care to go around for all the people that could benefit from it. And we know that generally this lack of research is out there, and though we know anecdotally that respite care is really important, as this quote from Ray Kirk and Jill Kagan from ARCH describes, that respite care for the most part is based primarily on practical ideas and good intentions, that we don't have a huge evidence base behind respite care that exists currently. And so part of what we are trying to do with the Break Exchange, which I'll describe in more detail a little bit later, is to build that body of knowledge and help us understand best practices and evidence-based respite care and connect practice with research so that we can conduct more research around respite care. And for those of you who are in the research world, I think you know why it's important. And those of you who aren't probably have some ideas as well. But this is just a little bit of information about why respite care research is important. So the first is that it can help us understand and develop those model practices, help us to build the evidence base for respite care. It can help create continuous quality improvement for existing respite services. And ultimately, the goal of it is to, using all this knowledge and information, help create better, more effective, efficient respite services that meet the needs of the individuals that are served so that we can improve the lives and well-being of caregivers and care recipients. And this is all important because we need to use this information to advocate for the needs of caregivers and care recipients so that there is some evidence to back up the importance of respite care for policymakers and other decision makers so that we can then advocate for more funding to expand services so that we can see greater impact from the services that exist. And this is also important because we can look at how we can use funding in the most effective way, not just for respite care, but thinking about within our social service systems, how do we distribute resources to respite care, because we know through research that providing resources for preventative respite care is going to save us money on other things like healthcare utilization costs and the foster care system, for example. So having research to examine and understand those relationships is going to help us to better use our funding as well. Hopefully, most of you are aware of the research agenda for respite care that was put out by ARCH, National Respite Network, led by Ray Kirk and Jill Kagan. If you're not, I really encourage you to go to the link on this website and download the full agenda and review it, because it is an excellent summary of the current state of respite research and points out a lot of the gaps that exist within respite research that does exist. In the work that was done to develop the research agenda, the group that got together came up with the following inclusive definition of respite. And I do want to take a minute just to read through this, because I think it's really important to help us think about respite care in sort of a new way. So this definition says that respite is planned or emergency services that provide a caregiver of a child or adult with a special need some time away from the caregiver responsibilities for that child or adult, and which result in some measurable improvement in the well-being of the caregiver, care recipient, and or the family. And I underscore the "and" on that because for a long time, I think we felt that providing respite services was enough. And what we're realizing is that it's not the service necessarily that's important, but it's the outcome. It's those measurable improvements that those services create, which actually provides that true respite, that true break for those families, and is going to help reduce stress and help with all the other potential negative outcomes from not having access to respite care. So really making sure that we understand the outcome that that respite care creates. And that's really where the research, I think, needs to focus, is how are we measuring those improvements in well-being so that we can see if the respite care is effective and is a quality respite program. From the research agenda, this great recommendations for future research came out that highlight 6 key areas to help establish evidence for the effectiveness of respite care. And on the next slide, I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail, but this is just a nice little visual that shows sort of the keys to future research. And the first area that we really need to focus on in research around respite care is addressing the foundational methodological concerns. And what we mean by that is that much of the research that has been done around respite care has not been strong, scientific, high level of evidence research. So there are very few, if not any, randomized controlled trials around respite care. Most of the research is qualitative research or case studies, and those are really important for sharing the stories about respite care, but it doesn't give us larger scale numbers. It doesn't show us pre and post measures of outcomes for families using respite care. And so there's a lot of different ways we can design research studies to strengthen the level of evidence for our stakeholders. The second area is that we need to create and develop more research projects that focus on those outcomes. So both individual and family, as well as societal outcomes, looking at what does respite care produce? How are families that use respite care versus those who don't compare in their outcomes, so that we can start measuring those measurable outcomes for what respite care benefits. The third is to conduct appropriate cost benefit and cost effectiveness research. Again, that's an area that there's a huge gap in, understanding how sort of a little bit of investment in respite can save money in other areas, so that we can start to cost shift some of our resources, especially in the federal state level, to fund more respite services, knowing if we have evidence that shows that it's saving money elsewhere in the system. The fourth area of recommendation is that we need to research systems change that improve respite access. How do we understand referral systems to respite? How do we create good communications? How do we best connect families to the type of respite that really is right for them? Those are all things that we can do in research. The fifth area is researching how to improve respite provider competence. One of the biggest areas that I know from my experience and some of the research shows that is a barrier to respite care is lack of trust in the provider, that families don't feel they can trust their loved ones with that provider, and that can really reduce the quality of the experience and the likelihood that the family will return to that respite program. And so if we can have some research that focuses on how to best train and evaluate provider competence, that's going to help improve respite services and outcomes. And then finally, the sixth key area is to conduct translational research that informs respite policy and practice. So making sure that the research we do doesn't just stop at the research study and the nice publication presenting the findings of the research, but that we take that research to the next level. We translate it into practice. We use it to make policy recommendations so that there can be an impact from the research that is done. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the research consortium. So Ray Kirk from ARCH has really been leading this great work as sort of a follow-up to the research agenda. And I'm sure Ray would be happy to answer more questions about this at the end of the webinar. I think he's joined us today, which is great. Thank you, Ray, for being here today. But through this research consortium that has been established, Ray has been able to identify more than 30 different foundations and government research programs in the US with potential interest in funding respite research, and has been sort of communicating with them and almost playing like a little bit of a matchmaker, trying to connect funding opportunities with researchers so that we can get more funded research projects, because that is a big barrier to research, is the lack of funding that aligns with the type of research that needs to be done for respite care. So this is a tremendous effort to really fund more research, which is so needed and really appreciated by the research community. And then through this, there has been identification of academic scholars and researchers that are interested in respite research, and we're also trying to stay connected with that group so that we can network and collaborate together a little bit better, because there's very few of us out there. A similar group is being developed in the UK under the leadership of Don Williamson, a great partner of ours, and that's called the UK Short Breaks Research and Practice Development Group. And so they're really also interested in building these research practice partnerships so that they can improve the respite services and create better outcomes for people in the UK. And so when we heard about this great group and the work they're doing, we got really excited because we want to do the same thing here, and thought, wow, we should just take this to the next level, because we know there's so many great programs and things happening in other countries around the world. So the idea that there's probably additional groups like this in other countries exists as well. And so our hope through the Break Exchange is to leverage the collective impact of all of these groups around the world so we can learn from each other and with each other to improve respite research and build stronger evidence for respite care around the world. So what is a knowledge exchange? So by definition, we looked at the University of Glasgow's knowledge exchange vision that they have, that you can look up and read a lot more about knowledge exchange, but their definition of a knowledge exchange is that it is a two-way flow of people and ideas between the research environment and the wider economy, thereby contributing to national prosperity, the quality of life of citizens, and cultural enrichment of our society. So the main idea of the knowledge exchange is to bring people together so that we can share ideas, learn from each other, work with each other to improve the work that we're doing. So in our case, respite care, and thinking about how do we create better respite systems, better respite programs, and better measure outcomes for the individuals that we serve. So we really feel this is a really great innovative method for identifying these best practices so that we can look at replication and adapting and applying best practices in different communities with cultural context being adapted accordingly. And it's a way to build this culture of best practices and evidence-based respite care so that in the future, when we design respite care services, we are really intentionally structuring them to maximize impact. So again, a lot of times respite programs get started because of a passionate person in a community or through a church, and they want to do something to help this population, and so they decide to host a respite event or create a respite program. And many of them work out really well, but there's so many lessons we can learn from each other on how to best structure respite care so that we can ensure sustainability of those respite programs, and that those respite programs are designed with high quality and in order to create the best outcomes for the people that they serve. So some of the key elements of a knowledge exchange include facilitating and supporting this interdisciplinary cross-sector network of researchers and respite program representatives. And what this does is really provides a forum for open scholarship among partners, for infrastructure, for us to be able to connect and collaborate on research and have a way to, in a timely fashion, exchange content and make decisions about what the best next step is in the broader research agenda for respite care. And this network allows us to create close working relationships and coordinate strategies so that we can build really strong networks both within and across national and international systems so that we can all know what's happening and learn from one another and really start to build this knowledge base of best practices to sort of create a home virtually for sharing and lessons learned so that people aren't making the same mistakes and that we're building off the work that each other is doing to continue to improve respite systems and services globally. So with that concept of the knowledge exchange in mind, we are really excited that we were able to launch the BRAKE Exchange, and BRAKE stands for Building Respite Evidence and Knowledge. We launched this in October of last year at the International Short Break Association Conference in Iceland. And we are so excited for the enthusiasm of our global partners around this idea. And this really is an international group of researchers, respite providers, agencies, and just individuals who are committed to building a culture of evidence-based respite care globally. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler, who's going to talk a little bit about the preliminary results of our new member survey and share a little bit about the demographics of the current individuals that are a part of the BRAKE Exchange.
Hi everyone. So through a survey that we've put out to new members, and if you haven't taken it, we highly recommend that you do it. It's very helpful for us. But since October, we've gained a network of more than 100 people now from 12 different countries. Those are highlighted in red on the map there to your right. And so an example of the survey is what type of program you're most knowledgeable about. And we have people from a national program to a very local and specific program, which we have had 20 people respond so far to. These people serve people across the lifespan, from pediatrics to older adults and seniors. And then we serve people of all abilities, from autism, muscular dystrophy, and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then we found that most of the funding is through public or government funds.
Okay, so just another plug on that new member survey. You notice that we only have 20 people that have filled that out so far. I think a few more have trickled in since we put this PowerPoint together, but we have over 100 members, so we really want to get everyone to fill out that survey. So if you have not filled out that survey, please do, and if you can't find the link to it from your welcome email, just shoot us a message and we'll give that contact information at the end, and we'll send you another link to that survey so we can really get a good understanding of who is in this knowledge exchange, so we can make sure we're designing it with our audience, you guys, in mind. So next I want to talk a little bit about a really exciting opportunity that has presented itself to us that will allow us to really grow this knowledge exchange. So again, this knowledge exchange started with an idea, and we had put in a proposal for a large Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant about a year ago that unfortunately was not funded. And so we decided this was such a great idea and so important that we wanted to kind of get it started even without funding. And so we did sort of a soft launch of this last fall at the International Conference in Iceland. But we recently received word that we did get a small seed grant from the Global Health Institute at the University of Wisconsin in Madison to help us accomplish three main objectives. The first is to expand the BRAKE Exchange, to really grow our membership globally so that we can have a large, robust network of researchers and practice providers across the world. The second is to develop a robust communication system, which is really exciting. So we have money budgeted to work with our IT web developers to build a web-based knowledge exchange portal and design that information exchange platform in a way that is going to help be useful for our members in the knowledge exchange and create a way for us to communicate on an ongoing basis and get the information that we want to our partners and dialogue back and forth. So that's really exciting, because I think that's really the key to this, is having a good, robust platform for us to be able to host all of this great exchange of knowledge. And the third is to conduct a global assessment of the current state of respite care in order to identify best practices and opportunities for improving respite systems. So with that, we plan to conduct a survey through our membership that we hope that you all participate in and help spread to your partners so that we can help understand respite care and what that looks like and how it's funded and what's working, what's not across the world, so that we can use the results of that assessment to really understand what is best practices and how can we learn from one another. So that's really, really exciting that we have the resources to help support that growth over the next year. So in the meantime, I want to just share a little bit with those of you who are maybe not in the academic world yet, or connected with academic partners, to help encourage you to help build that connection right away and get started on some collaboration between research, academia, and practice. So this just shows a little bit of sort of the steps in the research process. And I know for people who aren't in the research world, sometimes that gets really overwhelming and intimidating to think about research. It's sort of an ugly word to people who don't know it. And we want you to know that research is really fun and it's not hard to do, especially when you have a good, strong academic partner. So what we would encourage you all to do is to, if you haven't already, connect with your academic researchers or evaluators in your local community. If you don't have any in your local community, let us know. Let us help connect you to people. We can help leverage the great consortium that Ray has put together to connect practice providers with researchers who are excited and wanting to collaborate with practice partners on research projects that are going to be really meaningful and translatable into the community. So the first step is find your partners if you don't have them. And then identifying the projects and questions that you have, really as a practice provider, if you're in a respite program or you're a respite provider yourself, all the things that bother you or things you're wondering, those questions are really what drives research. So start jotting those down. Think about the what ifs that you have, and the ideas that you have that you haven't had time to really explore or think about. Those are things that your research partners can really help you explore within a research framework. And then you need to start thinking about, how are you going to measure the impact? So based on your question, that's going to have different types of measures that you're going to evaluate, but many respite programs aren't tracking a lot of outcomes. And so that's something to think about, and you can work with your research partners or evaluators to think about how on a day-to-day basis you can build some infrastructure to capture measures of outcomes within your programs. And then once you have, your outcomes from your research, then once you have your ideas for research, it's advocating for funding. So thinking about, are there research grants out there? Is there funding you can get from your agency or state or federal agencies to help support your research? And then once it's conducted, it's really, really important to disseminate those findings, because again, if research is happening in a vacuum and nobody knows the results of it, that's really problematic, because we want to share those findings, those best practices, the evidence, the knowledge that's generated, so others can learn from it and build off it as they move forward in their work. And then finally, in addition to sharing that information, thinking about how to translate that knowledge into practice, whether that's through policy changes and recommendations or actual adjustments in the types of services that are delivered in your own program. So these are just some tips to help think about how you can get through those different steps of the research process and do that in collaboration with your academic partners, so you don't have to be overwhelmed and intimidated about doing it on your own. So again, this was just a sort of short snapshot into the Break Exchange, as we're really in the early stages of development. And we want you guys to know that this Break Exchange is about you and all of our members. And so we are really open to your ideas and feedback on how to best structure this network to be useful and meaningful to each of you in the work that you do. So we encourage you to get connected and stay connected. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. The first is joining our Facebook group, which is the Break Exchange. If you search for that on Facebook, you can join our group and dialogue with members there and ask questions and put out ideas that you have or challenges you're facing and get feedback from the group. You can follow us on Twitter. You can visit our website and join our listserv at that is linked on our website, and then that will get you our quarterly newsletters that will come out and any other more urgent messaging and communication with updates on our grant and activities as we go along the way. Again, really important to complete that new member survey. If you haven't already, that's going to be really important for us. So please make sure you take time to do that. And then at any time, if you have questions or ideas or suggestions, please email us at the break.exchange@son.wisc.edu. Tyler checks those on a daily basis and is very responsive to getting back to those. So we encourage you to reach out anytime with any questions, ideas, or if you thought you signed up for the list and you're not getting messages, let us know and we'll double check that for you. And then we also encourage you to host a webinar. We'd really love to host at least quarterly webinars like this. They're super easy to do. All you need is something you want to talk about and share, and we'll do the rest. So we'll set up the platform and schedule the time for you and advertise it for you. But we'd love our members to start using this platform to share their ideas, to share best practices, to present challenges they face, to help get feedback from the group. There's really, no set structure for what that looks like. It's really an opportunity for you to have a platform with this group. We will record all webinars because we know it's difficult to find a time of day that works for everyone around the world. So we will always record the webinars and post those on our website for future viewing. So if you miss a webinar here or there, know that you can always come back to our website to look at those. And then finally, we really hope that you will all attend the International Short Break Association, or ISBA conference, in 2020. We are so excited that ISBA 2020 will be hosted right here in Madison, Wisconsin. This is a picture of our downtown area with the state capitol and the Monona Terrace Convention Center, which is at the front of the photo right along the lake. That beautiful round building is where the conference will be held, and it's going to be just a really great conference where we bring international partners from around the globe together to learn about what's happening with respite care around the world. And what's really nice about this conference is it's going to be hosted in collaboration with the ARCH National Respite Network. And so we will be having the National Lifespan Respite Conference being held sort of simultaneously woven into the ISBA conference. So we will have sort of a dual conference, a national and international conference happening at once. And the Respite Care Association of Wisconsin with Lisa Schneider is also a key partner in this work and trying to make sure that we get all of our state partners connected to this conference as well. And then there will be, through the Research Consortium, through ARCH, a Respite Research Summit on the last day of the conference on June 19th. So on that Friday is when we are going to specifically have some time set aside for the researchers. So really encourage you to stick around for that final day of the conference to be a part of those conversations with the research group. So with that being said, I just want to give a word of encouragement to all of you, because I know in the work that you do on a day-to-day basis, whether you're in practice or in the research world, that we often sometimes forget that we need respite too, and that we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. So that concept of not being able to pour from an empty cup is really, really important in our work. And hopefully this knowledge exchange allows you to help be filled by others as well, to keep you going in the work that you do. So that is the end of our webinar. I'm going to stop my screen share and open up the chat for any questions that people might have or comments that people want to add on to what we've said. So if you do have a question, feel free to put that into the chat, and I can call on you if you want to talk. I can unmute you to address those questions as well. So I see lots of people have introduced themselves, which is great. Please continue to do that. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or things they'd like to add to the conversation? Ray, I'm wondering if you're still on, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about the Research Consortium?
I just unmuted. Is that Is that working?
Yep, I hear you. If you want to just speak up a little bit, you're a little quiet.
Okay, I'll get closer to my my computer here.
Great.
Thanks for the webinar, Kim. A lot of really good stuff going on there, and I do see the 2020 conference as sort of a confluence of a number of these parallel agendas. So, with great expectations, we're looking forward to that. With respect to the research consortium in particular, it has been frankly a struggle to find foundations that have an expansive enough interest in the potential of respite to dedicate funds. So what we've been doing is identifying either NIH grants or foundation grants, such as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant, in areas where respite might be viewed as a component of a larger service plan, and to get as much an emphasis on educating the researchers on how to respond to those proposals in ways that excite the foundations to become more interested in it. The same is true with like the National Institute of Nursing Research and other components of NIH. Many of them really don't even know what the term respite means. It's not part of their lexicon. So again, our emphasis has been to get the academics and the researchers who are interested in pursuing those sources of funding to construct their proposals in ways that use the funding agency's language around how they define care, and not to redefine what respite is, but to express what respite is in ways that are understandable to the funding agencies. So we have had some success. We've got a couple of projects that we know are ongoing now that have sprung from that, a couple of multi-year funding projects. And we're hoping, of course, to identify more and to keep the dialogue going as we move forward, both to keep kind of an awareness across the listserv of researchers, which now numbers about 25, who have either already conducted research projects or are looking for funding to conduct future research projects. So it's like your break exchange. We have a couple more years under our belt, but it's still a work in process, and it's a challenge to because of the history that you mentioned earlier, that most of the research, the respite services that have been provided been provided on the basis of obvious need, but not a research base or an evidence base that providers and potential providers can stand on and say, we know that this works, even though everybody that provides respite knows that it works, but they know it in their hearts, which is great. But we also have to be able to convince the policymakers and the funders and the foundations and the national institutes and national program partners that it is a valuable service and one that can really be produce benefits and outcomes across the not just the service recipient, but also the caregivers and the family systems and even the public policy outcomes of lower rates of hospital utilization, lower rates of institutionalization. All that stuff is fertile ground, and we have members of the consortium that are interested in every aspect of that. So.
Yeah. No, I think two things that stood out from your comments, Ray, and thank you for sharing, is this idea that we need to frame and use the right language in order to get our projects funded, as well as get the attention, I think, of decision makers, and shifting away from the idea that respite is just a really nice service that is helpful, but that it's a critical intervention to improving family self-management. And that's sort of how I've been framing my research around respite care. And I think even just using some of those buzzwords that resonate with funders and policymakers can make a big difference in the conversation. That if we frame these as really important interventions, and that that engaging in respite services and receiving those is as important to a family and an individual as taking a medication is to managing their condition, that shifts the conversation a little bit, I think, and is something that we really need to get better at, because I think we're so used to talking about respite care and sort of that feel good, it's the right thing to do frame of mind, and we need to start talking about it as a really important intervention that we have to fund and reimburse for, just like we do for other therapies and medications for people as well.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this is Cassandra. I was finally able to join. Sorry, I couldn't get on right away. But one of the things I'm very interested in right now is looking at systems change. And I'm interested in how countries, and this is research, although initially it may not sound exactly like research, it's certainly more qualitative. I'm interested in the process of getting policies to change in different countries. How did, for example, Denmark, how were they able to introduce into their legislative process, how were they able to get respite on the radar and something that was universally accepted as a practice? So I'm interested in that angle. What were the steps? Were there some commonalities across countries that influenced policymakers to really look at respite seriously? So that's something I'm very interested in.
Great, thanks, Cassandra. And we definitely invite you to join us as we're developing this global assessment that we are putting together through this grant, so we can start to address some of those questions at the system level as well. I think that would be great to have some insight on how to frame those questions to get the right information from our partners across the globe, so we can understand what works from a systems policy level too. I think that's probably just as, if not more important than the individual program level, especially in the United States with how our system is set up, or lack thereof. Great. Anyone else that we do have a little bit of time here. Sorry, I talk really fast, so hopefully you guys could understand me as we went along, and we do have a smaller group. So if there is anyone else that wants to share a little bit more about themselves or things that came into mind as the webinar progressed, or ideas you have for the break exchange, we welcome you to unmute or type it in the chat, and we can have a little dialogue here for the few minutes we have remaining. Anyone else have anything they want to add or questions they have for us? Okay, well, if you're talking, I don't hear you. So, so I think that silence means you guys are good. We definitely want to thank you for taking the time today to join the webinar, and encourage you to stay connected to help spread the word about the break exchange. And we will be sending through our listserv to everyone a link to the recording of this presentation and a PDF of the slides. So look for that. If you aren't sure, if you're on the listserv, email us, and we can make sure that we get you on that list. Let me just put the email address in the chat box for those of you who might need that. That way you have it right at your fingertips. But feel free to email us at the break.exchange@son.wisc.edu with questions, comments, concerns, and we will also be sending out an evaluation for those of you who participated in the webinar that we would encourage you to complete so that we can make sure we improve future webinars. And again, if you would like to host the next webinar, please let us know. We would love to have you showcase some of your work and share what you're doing in your agencies as well. So feel free to reach out anytime, and we hope that you guys all have a good day or night, depending on what time it is from where you're calling in around the globe. So thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.